Very good morning to all of you. So, before start my session, let me introduce myself first. Myself, Dr. Balaram Sutradhar. I did my BSc and MSc in Physiology under such department. As you people already know that I have joined here as an assistant professor in the Department of Physiology. From today onwards, I'll be taking some of the topics from physiology. So, at the very beginning, I'll be starting with an important topic, that is functional anatomy of respiratory tract, and this comes under respiratory physiology. So, before start, let me start with the topic that I am going to discuss in this respiratory physiology course. In this whole unit is basically composed of the respiratory tract, that is functional organization of respiratory tract. I'll be discussing about the breathing mechanism, mechanics of breathing, and I will also discuss about the gaseous transport, and finally I will discuss about the regulatory mechanism of breathing or respiratory function. So in today's lecture, the chapter summary is respiratory tract. I'll discuss about the various types of respiratory epithelium. We'll discuss about respiratory zone and what are the different types of cells involved in the respiratory tract. That also I'll discuss. And other than this, I'll discuss about various type of non-respiratory function of respiratory system. Let's start with the very basic concept, that is respiratory physiology. So what is the basic definitions of respiratory physiology? It is nothing. It is the study of how the respiratory system functions. So to know about the functions of different systems in the respiratory physiology, we must know about the mechanism, how the gaseous exchange takes place, and what is the exact mechanism of movement of air, and also we will discuss about both the neural regulations and other regulatory mechanisms that involve with the regulations of breathing. So, to know about the details of respiratory physiology, we must know about the respiratory system. What are the most important components of respiratory system? If you see the slides, the most important components, that is the structural components of the respiratory system, obviously the lungs, the nose, mouth. Other than this, the function or lung functions mainly depends on a special tract, so-called airway, which is also known as the trachea. The trachea, which is called as airway, that connects the other parts of the respiratory systems, is called lungs or nose. Here, in the respiratory systems, other than lungs, the involvement of lungs, nose, and other parts, the muscles played an important role. What type of muscles are involved? There is two different types of muscles involved. The first one is called internal intercostal muscles and external intercostal muscles. Other than muscles, these systems also involve different type of blood vessels, mainly pulmonary artery and pulmonary vein. And another important structures that also played an important role in the respiratory system is called the rib or rib cage. So what is the most important functions of the rib? The most important functions of the rib is it protects our lungs. So here, throughout the session, throughout this lectures, we'll discuss one by one. If you see the respiratory tract, which is also known as the respiratory system, it is basically divided into two parts, based on the component or based on the structural component involved. So you can see from the slides, the first one is called upper respiratory tract, right? Upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract, right? So what are the most important component of upper respiratory tract? The most important components are nasal cavity, then pharynx and larynx. Here, the pharynx has some important property. So what is the important property of the pharynx? It performs dual function. It performs dual function because it carries the air as well as it also involves with the conduction of the food bolus, right? Here, larynx, again another important part of upper respiratory tract, also called the vocal cord, which involved with the vocalization, right? In comparison to upper respiratory tract, if we see the lower portions or lower respiratory tract, the most important functions of the respiratory systems are carried out by lower respiratory tract, because in lower respiratory tract there are multiple sections, which starts with a trachea. After that, trachea is basically also known as the windpipe, right? And this trachea has some special structural features. So what is the features? To maintain the elasticity of the trachea, it contains a special type of tissue, which is cartilaginous tissue, that gives the trachea an elastic property that prevents the trachea from the breakdown, right? So the presence of cartilage tissue in the trachea is very, very important in structural point of view, right? If you see the anatomical features of this trachea, the shape of the cartilage is C-shaped. Throughout the pipe, it is around 16 to 20 cartilage sections is there, which is C-shaped, right? And this trachea again branches into primary branches, which further develop to several bronchioles. So the primary branches are called the primary bronchi, and ultimately it divides several times and it ultimately ends the terminals or bronchial terminals, right? Here in the bronchial terminals are multiple numbers of alveoli as there, which is spherical in nature, and this spherical alveoli is the most important part involved with the gaseous exchange, right? It means if you see the structures, not all the parts are directly involved with the gaseous exchange. Some parts, mainly the upper respiratory tract, mainly involved with the conduction of air, and lower respiratory tract also involved with the conduction of air, but there are some special part, mainly the alveoli, which is present in the terminal bronchioles or respiratory bronchioles, they mainly involved with the gaseous exchange. Upper portions involved with the conduction of air only, right? So you can see from here the nature's structural features of trachea, which is a cylinder shape, and it contains the cartilage, which is C-shape. It basically acts as a airway or air passage. So here the cartilage rings basically prevents the trachea from collapsing, right? Now, if you see the structures of respiratory system, or if you see the structures of trachea, you will find different types of epithelial layer. So what are the most important types of epithelial layer present in the respiratory system? There are mainly three different types of epithelial layer. The first one is called a ciliated layer. It is also known as pseudostratified columnar ciliated epithelium. This ciliated epithelium basically found in trachea and bronchi, And other than the ciliated epithelium, another important epithelial layer is the cuboidal epithelium, which is present in the bronchioles. Along with this, alveolar and alveolar ducts also composed of some epithelium called simple squamous epithelium. It means the most important types of epithelial layer present in the respiratory tract are ciliated epithelium, then cuboidal epithelium, and simple squamous epithelium. Out of all these, if you see their functional properties, the most important one is the ciliated epithelium, right? So why ciliated epithelium is important? As because this cilia, whenever it gets damaged or the mucociliary movements is not fine, it is going to lead into a damage. It means ciliary damage. So if ciliary damage is there, it is very difficult. It is very difficult in the release of a mucus from respiratory tract. It means ciliary movements is very much essential for the proper functioning of respiratory passage or respiratory tract. Now, suppose cilia got damaged. So, what are the various complications may originate? Two complications is very common for ciliary damage occurs. The first one is called PCD or Primary Ciliary Dyskinesis or Dyskinesis. So, what is the biological basis of PCD? Basically, it is a rare genetic disorder. Or means, in this PCD, there is a high chances of mutations and different type of genes. Though the physiological features is known for PCD, but it is very difficult to say what type of genes are mainly regulate the PCD or what type of genes are, the proper functioning of what type of genes are essential. That is why I mentioned here, not only single gene is responsible for the development of PCD, there are multiple numbers of genes. In those genes, mutation occurs and mutation leads to the PCD. But if you see the other characteristics of PCD, that is defective ciliary motility. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, ciliary epithelium is essential because it contains some hair-like projection. And the movement of these hair-like projections is very much essential to release the secretions from tract, right? So if there is a defective ciliary motility, leads to the development of PCD. So in this particular case, mucociliary clearance of the persons will be very much defective. So leads to the difficulties in breathing mechanism. Other than PCD, there is another important disease may occur. This is called cystic fibrosis. The term is very common for all of us, no? Cystic fibrosis. It is also a genetic disorder. The most important genes involved in this particular disease is called CFTR or cystic fibrosis transmembrane regulator gene. And these genes or CFTR genes is basically present in the chromosome number 7. If there is a mutations in this particular gene, leads to the developments of cystic fibrosis. This is just a genetic basis. But if you see the physiological basis of the cystic fibrosis, what is the most important features of this? The most important features is here, motility reduced by thick secretion. In previous case, cilia get damaged, but here, cilia completely normal, right? Cilia completely normal, but motility reduced. So why? As because during the ciliary, in cystic fibrosis, Suppose this is the tract. In this particular conditions, the absorptions of chloride ion get suppressed. Along with this, reabsorptions of sodium ion occurs and reabsorptions of water into the lumen also occurs. Right? So due to the reabsorptions of both the sodium ion and the water molecules, the mucus becomes thick. It is due to the thickness of the mucus, it is very difficult to clear from the tract. Right? So you can see from here, secretions become thick and sticky that leads to affected mucociliary clearance. The most common mutations that occurs in cystic fibrosis is specific amino acid, that is phenylalanine, and this phenylalanine is present in the position number 508. It means overall in cystic fibrosis, it is also a genetic disorder. In this disorder, the affected gene is CFTR and the amino acid involved with this is phenylalanine, which is present in the position 508 of CFTR gene. And another important features here is there is a suppression of chloride secretion and there is an increased sodium reabsorptions and water reabsorptions. It gives a sticky mucus inside the tract. Am I clear? Now, after both the things, the disease that occurs in these particular conditions that was related to the secretion only. Now, to know about the details of the respiratory systems, we must know about the different regions of the respiratory system. So here, the regions are upper airway, the conducting airway, and the alveolar airway. Here, both the conducting airway and the alveolar airway, these are two important classes of the airway, which is given by ovals, also known as oval classification. What are the most important functional features of both the conducting airway and alveolar airway? Yes, conducting airway only involved with the conduction of air. There is no gaseous exchange, right? But alveolar airway involved with the gaseous exchange, right? Now see, this conducting airway and respiratory airway are called the zones. Means the airway of the lungs are called zones, called conducting zones or respiratory zones. If you see the structures, the conducting airway, which starts with the windpipe called the trachea, right? Though if you see the number of trachea present here is only single. It branches primary bronchus. What is the maximum number of primary bronchus? That is 2, that originates from the trachea. Again, the primary bronchus is segmented into different bronchioles. Ultimately, if you see the counts or number of branches up to terminal bronchioles, it is around 60,000 terminal bronchioles. See, initially it was single, the trachea, which is divided into primary bronchus, 2. Further it is divided, further it branches. Ultimately, whenever it reaches to the terminal bronchioles, its number is around 60,000. Here, every single terminal bronchioles, or from every single terminal bronchioles, there is an origin of respiratory bronchioles. her alveoli are present, right? You can see the respiratory bronchioles, or number of respiratory bronchioles which originates from terminal bronchioles only, that is around 5 lakhs. And each respiratory bronchioles contains millions of alveoli, which is very essential, which is involved with the gaseous exchange, right? So this is the general structural organization which initiates with the nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx, then trachea, then primary bronchus, secondary one, ultimately terminal bronchioles. After the terminal bronchioles, the bronchioles originates from that is called respiratory bronchioles, which contains millions of alveoli that participate in the gaseous exchange mechanism. See, this alveoli, which is present in lung, are covered by the lung, both the right and left lung are covered by some layer. So what is the most important layer? What is the important functional features of those layers? Here you can see the visceral pleura and the parietal pleura. These are nothing, these are the membrane. These are membrane-like structures. Here, the visceral pleura, this layer attached to the outer surface of both the lung, right? Whereas the parietal pleura, that is attached to the chest wall. You can see the annulus diagram here. See this portion, the color is given here, the chest wall, right? Along with the chest wall, there is a parietal pleura, right? Whereas this is the lung, and this is the inner surface of the lung, and in this inner surface, there is another layer called visceral layer. So in between this, there is a space. In between this, there is a space, and this space is called pleural cavity. This one, right? This pleural cavity are filled with pleural food. So it means this pleural layer is structurally important for lungs because it protects the lungs from external forces. It gives a moisture or liquidy features that is important for the proper functioning of lungs. Now, if you see the airway of the lungs, as I mentioned, the airway of the lungs are basically called as generation. From initial part, from trachea, it is divided into several generations. What is the maximum number of generations in lung airway? The maximum number of generations in the lung airway is 23. Right? You can see from the diagram, the trachea is called the generation 0. From here, primary bronchus originates. So here, from where primary bronchus originates are the part of conducting zone. So the conducting zones, out of 23, the conducting zones contains a total of 16 airway generation. Generation 1 to generation 16. In this conducting zone, what are the most important airway? The most important is the bronchi, that is generation 1 to generation 10. Generation 1 to generation 10 are the bronchi. And terminal bronchioles is from generation 11 to generation 16. It means the conducting zone, you can see from here, the trachea, the upper walls, to the generation 0. After that it branches, called primary bronchi. So as I mentioned, conducting zones is basically composed of a total of 16 generations. So initial generations is the bronchi, and the maximum number of generations in bronchi is generation 1 to generation 60. After that, terminal bronchi starts with the generation number 11 and ends with the generation number 60. So this up to this terminal bronchioles or up to this generation number 60, it mainly involves the conduction of air. No gaseous exchange takes place up to generation number 60. But from generation number 17 to 23, mainly involved with the gaseous exchange. So here, generation number 17 to 23 again subdivided into 3 sections called respiratory bronchioles, that is generation 17 to generation 19, alveolar duct, that is from 20 to 22, and finally the alveolar sac, which contains the lung alveoli, is generation number 23. So it means across the tract there is multiple number of generation. Some parts involved with the conduction of air only, and other parts involved with the gaseous exchange only, right? Now, in previous one slide, I mentioned there are different types of epithelial cell layer, mainly 3 different types, and their functions also important. Other than this epithelial layer, if you see the cellular features of both the upper respiratory tract or trachea and the respiratory airway, you will find sharp difference. Not only the difference in cell types, obviously difference in cell functions also. So what are the most important types of cells presence in trachea, and what are the most important types of cell presence in the respiratory airways, and what is their function? You can see the ciliated respiratory epithelium is common one. Other than these goblet cells, other than goblet and ciliated epithelia, some other cells also present. So what are the other important cell types that are present in the windpipe, that are present in the airway? You can see from here basal progenitor cell. So which one is the basal progenitor cell? The basal progenitor cells is present in the basement membrane, right? So what is the most important features of this basal progenitor cells? As the terms contains the progenitor, means it has the property of regeneration of some other cells. The cells, those have the regeneration capacity of other cells or generation capacity of other cells or nothing. These are the stem cells. It means the basal progenitor cells act as a stem cell. Next one, the goblet cells. Again, a very, very important cell types. So why it is important? Because the release of or secretions of mucus is carried out by these particular cell types called goblet cells. This is a newly identified cell called brush cell. In some cases, it is also known as tuft cells. Right? So, what is the functional features of these brush cells? Chemoreception means this cell surface of the brush cell or cell surface receptors of the brush cells is very much sensitive to chemical substances because it contains some receptor that receives the chemical sensation. Other than these, club cells, which is also known as the Tera cells, that produce an important types of protein that is called surfactant protein or surfactant stabilizing protein. There are various types of surfactant proteins. In this particular case, the most important type of surfactant proteins found in the A, B and the D type of surfactant protein. I'll discuss about the role of surfactant in respiratory system. Another important cell types called neuroendocrine cells. What is the features of these neuroendocrine cells? These neuroendocrine cells, also known as pulmonary neuroendocrine cells or PNEC, can be the source of several types of lung cancer. A very, very important point. Here in the respiratory tract, if you see the cellular features, you'll find a special type of cells from a cancer may originate. So the name of the cells is PNEC, pulmonary neuroendocrine cells, right? So it not only involved with the origin of small cell carcinoma or cancer, it also involved with the bronchial carcinoid tumor formation. Now see, what are the other type of cells? In previous slides, as I mentioned, all the cell types are present in the windpipe or upper portions. But here, the lung alveoli contains two special type of cells, and their functions is also different. So what are these two different cells? Called type 1 pneumocytes and type 2 pneumocytes. So what is the features of type 1 pneumocytes and features of type 2 pneumocytes? The type 1 pneumocytes actually presents in the most of the surface of the lung alveoli. It occupies 95% of the surface area of alveolar system. Generally we know the lung alveoli, which is spherical in nature, right? Around 95% of the lung alveoli is covered by type 1 pneumocytes. Only 5% area, surface area of alveolar systems is covered by type 2 pneumocytes. So in type 1 pneumocytes, very, very important point in clinical point of view, right? In type 1 pneumocytes, as the surface area is high, this part is mainly involved with the gaseous exchange. As I mentioned, the lung alveoli, which is a part of respiratory zone, involved with the gaseous exchange, as I mentioned. So why? Is because the type of cell called type 1 pneumocyte covers around 95% of the total surface area of alveolar system. Due to that, its main function is the gaseous exchange. Whereas type 2 pneumocytes, only 5% surface area is occupied by type 2 pneumocytes. Other than this, type 2 pneumocytes produce two proteins. One is called surfactant protein and another one is alpha-1 antitrypsin. This slide is very important. So now see what is the important features of alpha-1 antitrypsin. Question may ask, what is the sources of alpha-1 antitrypsin in respiratory systems? Which type of cells are involved in the productions of alpha-1 antitrypsins? So obviously, it is by type 2 cells. So what is the features of the alpha-1 antitrypsin? What is the physiological basis? It is serine protease inhibitor. You know, serine protease, it is an enzyme. This serine protease is inhibited by alpha-1 antitrypsin. And alpha-1 antitrypsin is secreted by type 2 pneumocytes. So if there is an inhibition of serine protease, it helps in the breakdown of neutrophil elastase. Neutrophil elastase again is a protein which is secreted by neutrophil in inflammation, right? It means the secretion of or synthesis of neutrophil elastase occurs in inflammation by neutrophil cell. Now we need to know whether neutrophil elastase is beneficial or harmful. If you see the role of alpha-1 antitrypsin, it acts as a serine protease inhibitor and it helps in the breakdown of neutrophil elastage. If neutrophil elastage remain unbroken or not destroyed, what may happen? See, it will destroy the alveolar epithelium. Which is involved with the gaseous exchange, right? Once it destroys the alveolar epithelium, the elastic nature of the lungs goes into damage, leads to the development of a very, very important lung disease called emphysema, right? The persons having alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency leads to early onset of emphysema. So I hope these slides are clear to you. Alpha-1 antitrypsin is an important protein which is synthesized by type 2 pneumocytes, and these alpha-1 antitrypsins act as a protease inhibitor that helps in the breakdown of neutrophil elastage. Neutrophil elastage is synthesized by neutrophil in a particular condition called during inflammation. If any remains unbroken, it leads to the developments of emphysema. Now, here you can see the type 1 pneumocytes and type 2 pneumocytes. Both are involved with a certain function. We already know about the function of alpha-1 antitrypsin. So, what is the role of surfactant or surfactant protein? The surfactant protein, it is again produced by type 2 alveolar epithelial cell. It is basically made up of lipid and protein. The major portions of this surfactant proteins composed of lipid around 90% and 10% protein only. Now question is, what type of lipid is present in surfactant protein? And what are the different type of surfactant protein produced by type 2 pneumocytes? Mainly A, B, C and D type of surfactant stabilizing proteins are produced by type 2 pneumocytes. Most commonly, the lipid found in surfactant protein is phospholipid, right? What type of phospholipid? That is dipalmityl phosphatidyl choline, which is also known as DPPC. And this DPPC is also known as lecithin. Means both are the synonyms of each other, lecithin or DPPC. If you see the amount of the lipid, around 50% is lecithin out of 90% phospholipid, right? Here, the surfactant protein, which is produced by type 2 pneumocyte, is very important. Why it is important? Because it helps to reduce the surface tensions of the cell. Generally, surface tensions produced in a layer called air-water interface. Suppose there is a beaker having water molecule. This is the air, this is the water. In between there is a layer, right? So surface tension always produced in air-water interface. Again, the tension that produced in the air-water interface, it depends on whether it is present in the deeper portions of the water molecules. Suppose there is a molecule, this molecule is pulled in all directions. As it pulls all directions, the tension, it maintains the balance in all directions. There will be no tension, right? Now, Suppose another molecule which is present here in between the layer, right? Here it moved in 3 different directions. This remains free, right? In this particular situation, it will produce tension because it is not balanced. Here in the first case, the water molecules moved in all the different directions, which help in the stabilization process. But these molecules pulled in 3 different directions. This part is free. So due to that, it creates a tension called surface tension, right? So surface tension is very, very important in physiological point of view. So here in lung alveoli, an important molecule called surfactant, which has 2 different regions. Suppose this is surfactant molecule. This surfactant molecule is composed of 2 sections. One is head portions, which is hydrophilic in nature, and the tail portions, which is hydrophobic in nature. So here, to maintain the surface tension, the head portions of the surface, surfactant, they get deeper, right? Due to that, here this area is actually the lung alveolar section. In the lung alveolar section, if there is a surfactant whose head portions is just around the layer, right? It helps in the regulation of, or it maintains this surfactant prevents the collapsing of the lung alveoli by maintaining a certain pressure into the alveoli by surfactant molecule. I hope now clear. The surfactant helps to maintain the surface tension in the lung alveoli. Why surface tension is important? It is important because it prevents the collapsing of the alveoli, as well as it helps to maintain the elasticity of the alveoli, which is essential in gaseous exchange mechanism, right? It means all 3 different type of proteins like surfactant, alpha-1 antitrypsins, along with some other proteins is very essential in respiratory system. So here, the respiratory system, as we already know, mainly involved with the gaseous exchange. Now question is whether it is only involved with the gaseous exchange or it also involved with some other functions. Yes, along with the respiratory functions by respiratory system, it also involved with some other respiratory function. Some other functions called non-respiratory functions. Now, I'll discuss about what are the other functions or what are the non-respiratory functions of respiratory systems. Before that, we must know, as I mentioned, surfactant is important. Now, question is whether there are any factors that helps to maintain the concentration, the amount of surfactant protein. Yes, there are some physiological conditions, there are some molecules which helps to maintain the surfactant amount of surfactant protein. So what are these? There are some molecule which involve with the increase of surfactant proteins called glucocorticoids, thyroid hormones and releasing hormones. Similarly, some other conditions which also involve with the regulations of surfactant protein amount. So these are high insulin level, cigarette smoking and oxygen inhalation. These are certain factors or most common factors that regulates the amount of surfactant protein, which is essential, which is important to maintain the gaseous exchange process. Now see, what are the other functions called non-respiratory functions? Obviously, along with the gaseous exchange, it involved with the regulation of pH, means it involved with the maintenance of acid-base balance, and important cell types called mast cell. Important cell types called mast cells, which is present in the lung, and these mast cell produce a heparin molecule. So all of us know this heparin acts as an anticoagulant, which is a non-respiratory function. Macrophages in the lung alveoli have some phagocytic property. We know the WBC molecules is mainly involved with the phagocytic process. But here in the respiratory system, you can see a special type of cells called macrophage is present mainly in the lung alveoli, which has phagocytic property. Another important function called converting enzyme, which is present in the lung, and these converting enzymes mainly involved with the conversion. So conversions of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Here it acts as a potential vasoconstrictor, right? This is also one of the non-respiratory function of respiratory system. Along with this, the respiratory systems also involved with the regulation of body temperature, and it also involved with the vocalization process. So here, what we have seen, this respiratory system is not only involved with the conduction of air, not only involved with the gaseous exchange, it also involved with the several other functions which is carried out by some other different type of cells present in the lung alveoli, other than pneumocytes, other than basal goblet cells. These are the mast cells, macrophage, right? So this is the gist of today's lecture. Thank you.